My name is Sarah Captain, based in California. I work for Continuent, and today I have the pleasure to interview Matthew Lang, the Customer Success Director of Continuent for the Americas, on the topic of do-it-yourself clustering versus tungsten clustering for high availability, disaster recovery, and geographic distribution. Matt, can you please tell me how you got into the MySQL space and Continuent?
Sure. It's kind of interesting that I liked to work at startups. I worked at some large companies, but I, kind of gravitated to the startups. And at one startup that I was working at, and this was a long time ago, right? Not everyone had a website, at that time, dating myself, of course. But we were using a proprietary database, no names mentioned. And it was working fine. It was a character-based application, but we really needed a website. And our website, all the technology for the website didn't really work well with the proprietary database. And of course, I read how people were setting up LAMP stacks everywhere, installing Linux systems with MySQL and PHP, and producing these really slick sites. So we wanted to be a part of that. I introduced MySQL kind of as an experiment at this company. But to get the data, out of our proprietary system, I had to write a replication tool. So I wrote a real-time replication tool to replicate from the proprietary database into MySQL. And then from there, all the MySQL data had to be replicated back to the proprietary database. So I wrote a two-way real-time replication stream. It worked pretty well, and we got our website up and the company grew. And actually, it turns out that after like 12 or 13 years of me writing that, they are still using that proprietary replication technology as well as the proprietary database and MySQL. So it really got me excited, using open source databases, especially MySQL. And I was really involved afterwards in the MySQL community, and I worked for other startups as well that used MySQL.
And so this sounds like you've been around for a while and experimented with a variety of technologies and even created some of your own. In this competitor analysis, being an employee of Continuent, how did you actually keep yourself unbiased or honest?
Well, kind of what you just said. So I can't say that I'm completely unbiased. I work for Continuent, but I happen to think that the tungsten products are, amazing, and that's why I work here. But honest, sure, because like you said, I've worked with quite a bit of technologies out there, cloud providers, AWS, as well as Google Cloud, Azure even, and some other databases, operating systems. I've got some experience, and I've been really fortunate to see a lot of different technologies. And a lot of these technologies work really well for specific applications. So, there's always a right tool for the job that you need to do. And I happen to think that Continuent products are, one of the best out there. But there are some really good products, as well, and they work really well for certain applications.
And how did you make the comparison between tungsten clustering and do-it-yourself when tungsten clustering is a single family of products?
So yeah, that's the answer what you just said, right? Tungsten clustering is a complete product backed by enterprise support. So you get everything you need for your MySQL high availability, as well as DR, multi-site, active, multi-cloud, whatever. It's all really contained in one product. When you're doing this DIY, you as an admin, you have to go and evaluate each particular component. You've got to test each component, and then you've got to test them all together to make sure they all work together. And then when you've done all that, you really need some powerful orchestration to glue all these components together so that they work together, properly. So, you get proper failover. And that really takes a lot of time and energy. And after you spent all that time and energy, are you really confident that you can, launch this in a production environment and it's just all going to work, right? What about failover? What about load balancing? Is it all going to work? Um, how confident are you that the first time it's going to work? And if something does go wrong, where do you go? Is there some sort of support that you can get? When you have a mixture of components, it's hard to get a cohesive support on all these different components. And do you want to be kind of left on your own? In the middle of a situation where there could be downtime that could negatively impact your enterprise.
Definitely not.
Yeah. So if you imagine, for instance, just a simple scenario, right, where you have a cluster, you've got some app servers, and you've got maybe like a proxy layer between your app servers and those clusters, and there's some process, in your orchestration to detect a failed primary, for instance. So when that happens, the orchestration needs to select an up-to-date replica and promote that replica to be primary and take that failed primary out of the cluster, right? And during this time, we don't want any errors on our application, right? We don't want our application to disconnect. So there's all this kind of orchestration pieces happening behind the scenes. And then, of course, when we repair the failed node, we want to be able to bring it back into the cluster easily, have replication catch up, and bring it in as a replica to the cluster. So, to do all of this, it really requires a high degree of monitoring your resources and orchestration, of course. So, to do this all from scratch is really quite a challenge.
Hmm. It's a challenge, but knowing a few engineers, isn't it more fun?
Well, sure. I mean, DIY is always fun, and I'll be the first to admit when I was working for startups, there was a lot of DIY. That's fun. Uh, the only thing is that that's a really high price for making it more interesting.
Mhm.
Do you really have the time and the resources and infrastructure to build an enterprise system from scratch, from start to finish? And then, even if you could, would you be confident enough to run your enterprise applications on it? And do you feel confident that you're going to be able to support yourself, if there's any issue? So, this is kind of our bread and butter. This is exactly what we do. We've been doing this since 2004. We've already tested all the scenarios. Just an interesting kind of tidbit, we have a rules list, over 70 rules that we implement for quality checks, availability checks, and recovery checks for our clustering software. We've developed these rules and fine-tuned them, over years of development and testing. So really, it might be interesting to kind of do this from scratch, but as an admin or a DevOps engineer, your time is valuable, right? And it would be well spent to actually do stuff that it helps the business, um, and be able to work on that rather than develop stuff that's kind of been done and perfected for you already.
Hmm. And using tungsten is fun too, anyway, right? At least I find it to be pretty fun as a product.
Oh, I like it, and I especially like it that I don't have to worry about applications going down. So, middle of the night or whatever, it. Um, I used this product actually. That's how I got started with, working with Continuent. Is that one of the startups chose Tungsten Clustering as their high availability and DR tool, and I thought, yeah, this is really a great product. This is something that I want to be a part of, and so that's how I ended up here. But I digress.
Yeah, like why write the game when you could play the game? Why reinvent the wheel, basically?
Oh, sure. Yeah, exactly.
uh, so when would do-it-yourself be a solid option versus tungsten clustering?
Well, if you really want to do it yourself, then that would be for more or less critical systems, right? Or for systems that don't require, say, a high degree of high availability, maybe don't require a disaster recovery. Maybe for test systems or something like that. When you really don't have the demands required from an enterprise system.
Mhm.
Um, that's what I would say.
And what about those who like to have a lot of control over their data and databases?
So that's actually a good thing about tungsten clustering is that it's a bolt-on application, right? You use your favorite version of MySQL or MariaDB or Percona Server, really whatever you want. You can mix versions too within the cluster. And you have full control, right? Because you're running your regular MySQL servers with Continuent on top of it. So if you want to tune MySQL, like you always, have been doing, no problem. Same with systems tuning. It works exactly like that because that's what it is, right?
Mhm.
You're using your same MySQL in Linux that you're used to using. And if you, maybe contrast this with some of the more managed database solutions, you don't have as much fine tuning and control. And that's by design, obviously, um, the cloud vendors need to restrict control so that, they maintain control over their infrastructure. So, you can admin MySQL just like you always have.
Mhm. So, any last words, Matt, for those out there looking for a clustering solution or building their own or thinking about, business critical MySQL?
Sure. So, one thing I'd really like to mention is, support is important
Mhm.
when you're dealing with an enterprise application. And so at Continuent, we pride ourselves with 24 by 7 support. And for urgent cases, our response time is typically less than 3 minutes. So, if you have an urgent issue, you're going to be able to get a qualified engineer on the line with you. And it might be a screen share session too, where we work on it together. Um, and each of our engineers has over 20 years, at least 20 years of experience doing systems, Linux systems administration, DevOps, site reliability engineering, and MySQL database administration. So, really, when you go with an enterprise solution like Tungsten Clustering, you get all that support included, which is really important. You know that you have someone there that'll help you whenever you need it. Or if you just have basic questions, just, how do I do this? Or what's the best way to do this? We're always happy to talk to our customers like that. If you're going to do the DIY route, first, good luck because it's a daunting task to really select all the different technologies, evaluate each technology, each piece, replication piece, maybe a proxy piece, right?
Mhm.
And then assemble them all together to make sure they work together and then orchestrate them and finally run all the tests that you need to do to make sure that this is all going to work in production with your production workloads. Testing here really is key. And if you're going to do this, you really need to create a test system that mirrors your production system, production topology, and production workloads.
Mhm.
And then any sort of failure scenarios that could possibly happen. And then test your solution with that. That's really the best way to go with a DIY solution, or really any solution, but especially for DIY, so that you can have a high degree of confidence that when you put this into production, it's going to work with your production workloads. And really, that's kind of the best advice that I have for going the DIY route.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time, Matt. And there you go, folks, from the expert. I appreciate it and have a great day.
Thanks, Sarah. It was a pleasure doing this interview with you.
You too.